Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out in person to talk about what it means to come out in person. Just how tightly we should hold on to it, or how quickly we should let it go? Is it really a crossroads looming out there just a few months ahead of us? Is it a revolution in what it means to participate and to educate, or are we overplaying and overblowing what's at stake in online education, what it means for the voice and the body in the classroom? Are we really moving to global democratic education with access for so many, or is this a corporate opportunity to sleep academic guard? There's a lot to think about. It needs to be thought about in public. We're approaching the end of the term, creeping toward the end of a year. It's a good time for meditative reflection. It's cooling outside, cozy in here, and here's the plan of the evening. Eat, drink, talk, think. We have a panel of 4, each of whom will talk briefly but trenchantly, and then we open to wide conversation from and including all of you. At the right moment, we enhance the evening with an example, a vivid, illustrative of voice work in action. No formal introductions are appropriate, I think, but I will name our guests in order of the alphabet, which is also the order of presentation. Lou Bloomfield is a legendary teacher in the Department of Physics. His research concentrates on magnetic forces within clusters of small particles. I think that means us. And his course, How Things Work, is one of the gems in the curriculum. He'll be teaching one of the first in the series of online courses beginning in a matter of weeks. It's the right time to catch Professor Bloomfield. Kate Burke of the drama department is expert in the ways of voice, using it and teaching others how to use it. She's an actor and teacher of actors, as well as a mentor to faculty who want to learn and to train their voices. Kate's also been a moving force behind this evening. We all award thanks for that. Claire Kinney of our English department is a distinguished scholar of the Renaissance and brilliant teacher of Shakespeare, and a canny philosopher of pedagogy. She herself has been known to tread the boards in acting costume, and even when she's dressed as she is this evening. Claire knows that teaching is always and ever a performance of the voiced body. Andrew Wade was head of voice at the Royal Shakespeare Company for nearly 15 years. Traveling the world, listening, teaching, advising, he's kept the bard a living sound. What more important work is there? Among many striking achievements stands his role as verse consultant to the film Shakespeare in Love. It's a great honor to have him here this evening. Finally, as you settle in and the sugars course through your veins, I do want to mention that this Thursday, the Humanities Institute in the German department will host a presentation on Walter Benjamin by the distinguished Manfred Schneider, visiting from Germany. That's 7 p.m. in the faculty lounge of Bryant Hall across the way. And then the last event of the season, 10 days from now, when the Undergraduate Humanities Initiative will sponsor a program of short talks by undergraduates under the title On Being Human. It's an entirely wonderful group of students. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. That's next Wednesday in Now Hall at 7:15. And now, to begin promptly, I turn with gratitude to Professor Bloomfield.
Well, so I'm a physicist, and I teach a physics course, but actually more my typical audience, that is non-scientists. I see no other scientists that I know are scientists in the audience. That probably reflects, the fact that you're my audience, reflects my taste in what's to teach in physics. That's why I teach a course called How Things Work, which is an introduction to physics in the context of everyday objects. How water works, how these various lights work, how cameras work, and so on. And to me, it seems like the right way to teach physics. So I've been doing it for 20 years, and it had, to date, just under 10,000 students. starting January 14th. I will double that number plus some conceivably immediately. So the pre-enrollment is some astronomical figure, 30,000 students. We'll see whether they show up. We'll see whether more or less. But in any case, that's what I'm heading off to do. So I'm taking my teaching on the road. Now, I've done that before in the sense that I've done a lot of television over the past decade or a little more, almost always as an explainer of science. And so I'll come back to that in a moment. But my experience teaching in the classroom has evolved. So I teach a large class. It was at times as large as 500. It's currently down to an intimate gathering of about 250. Much better. But the students have changed. And they're the way they interact with me over the years. And so, despite being a physicist, I'm quite aware that body language and voice are as important in the classroom and basically in any interaction as the content. So I love the content, but I'm also aware that how I present it is quite important. And so when I teach in person, I always try to be alive, energetic, present, engaged, really there, to an extent as natural as I can be, but very involved, and try to convey that to students, because really I'm trying to project the right mixture of these various issues, this enthusiasm, confidence, openness, humor, presence, because I want the students to work with me, and if we establish a very distant relationship, they'll be drifting off. I mean, even 20 years ago, they would be drifting off. Now they're drifting off much more readily. So I want them to be comfortable with me as we work through the material. When I teach through the media, which I, as I say, I've done a fair amount, whenever I've done television shows, and I did a television series for a year at one point. So I'm trying to do the same thing, and my voice involved is the same thing. It's always been a little bit odd to me to think that people say, well, I actually have a voice that's appropriate for television, and one time I showed up at a particular venue we were filming at, and when I asked the people at the desk where the television people were, they said, oh, you must be the talent, which, never identified that word, but evidently there's something in how I speak or spoke to them, and how they go, oh, he's not the camera guy, he's the talent. In any case. So I'm trying to do the same thing. I have the same tools to work with, but what I lose is the sense of audience, right? Because now I have to project out how they respond to what I say when I'm talking into a camera. Now, being an introvert, so I'm an introvert, but I'm also a showman. I'm in sort of this funny mix, probably not unique, but okay. I like to put on a show, and it's often sort of for my own benefit. Sorry, admittedly it's not entirely. But so I'm trying to figure out what I'm saying that will be of value to them, how to engage and all that stuff. And 20 years ago, these were very different activities. Talking to a live audience as opposed to live student audience as opposed to talking to a camera that's only connected to students. I think they're converging. So, okay, so I don't know, this is a thesis or something. That the students have become more and more used to watching stuff on screens of various sizes, down to this size. And as a result, the interaction is much more distant. Like the lens zooms out, and I'm off in the distance. They more and more objectify me, certainly in their communications with me. And I think to an extent, even in the classroom. So I don't get the same level of visible engagement with it that I did 20 years ago. And I don't think it's just because my hair is a different color and so on. So even in a live classroom, I have to do the same thing. I have to sort of project out how will they respond in their faces may not be moving, but I assume they're still in there responding. And so I'm trying to do the same things that I would that I do when I'm talking to camera. So I feel like there's a sort of screen between us. Even though we're imaginary screen, they're watching me on the screen. I try to keep them from opening their gadgets. It's a very hard job to do that, to keep them out of the computers, which become entertainment centers. So it's like being a comedian in front of a hard audience. The audience has gotten harder and harder. My shtick's the same, but pretty much, I think. But it's hard to get a visible rise out of this. So I'm trying to maintain the energy from within and project it out. It's hard. You know, I can see what life is like for a comedian who's telling great jokes and getting nothing back. You have to bring the energy out from within. And many times I can do it. Sometimes I can't. So there is, however, a tendency in the absence of feedback to begin to try too hard. I struggle with that. So that it's easy to be basically go over the top, trying to get a rise out of something. So it can be too glib, too chatty, too energetic, too funny, which is to say not funny at all, too rambling. And fortunately, I have enough of a sense of integrity and purpose that it can rein me in from those directions and try to bring me back to a more centered delivery. I'm not an actor, but I play one on TV. I've done that, right? I'm sure I'm the first person in the universe to say that joke. But the same thing in class. I actually don't know how to act, but I know how to teach and to try to convey what I want the students to know and try to get them engaged with me and feel like I care about them. So I work very hard at that. And one of my, just a few more thoughts on that. My experiences with television, science television is very hard to do because executive producers are scared to death of science. They figure every word of science that appears on the air is a moment in which the thumb drifts towards the channel button. And so I had to fight for literally words. I'm fighting for every word. One episode, filming at Burt's Bees, I did a piece on the difference between saturated and unsaturated fat. And there's lots of interesting science, including physics in that. And they did one that was this long. And then the directors go, the producer goes, how about can you make that shorter? Can you make that shorter? Can you make, we're down to like, there was nothing left. So I know that when I'm faced with one of these things, nothing concentrates one's attention like knowing that I have a 20% chance of getting the next 2 sentences into the show. And it's all in, can I make it compelling enough and clear enough and put myself into it enough that it's got to be natural, but not, it's sort of stage natural. It doesn't, I've had producers and directors and some good ones and bad ones. But the worst one of memory was one who had done a lot of commercials, and you've heard of commercials. And they're hyper reels. Wow, it's so great, everything's wonderful. So he would be, the people who go for the entire show always sounding like they're so excited, it's so wonderful, you want to buy this, it's just terrific. And so he was directing me to act like that, and it was terrible. I sort of bought into it at the time, but the other talent was telling me, dude, this has never been aired, it's terrible. And he was right. He was the professional, I was the amateur. And anyway, so trying to find, in any context, but really trying to do media-based science education, which is what I'm only doing with this course on Coursera, trying to find the right balance. I guess sort of stage natural. I don't know if that's a term, but it's sort of what I'm thinking like. To be there, just be talking, I'm basically talking to you all right now, and I want to deliver the science pretty much that way. It's really very focused, very engaged, put it in my voice, put it in my manners. And in producing the course, heading off to the course, my sense is that if this is going to be of any value in the future, if these online courses are going to go anywhere, so that's another question, regardless of voice, is this the future or is this a dead end that will be abandoned and something else will happen? If they're going to be of any value, they're going to be taking advantage of the best practices everybody knows about already, which includes television and other related media. And so I'm producing my course right now as though I were producing television, not as though I were lecturing, which means that it's not one continuous delivery, it's not sort of a single 60-minute piece that might be diced up, but basically it was me all I'm essentially doing a simple television show, which means you film it not necessarily in chronological order, and you very carefully assemble every part of it. And it's a lot of work maintaining sort of a consistent behavior on my part. Voice, physical appearance, all that stuff is a challenge. I learn a lot from watching my own videos. So I've done the first episode. I'll call it an episode. 60 minutes, which takes about 50 hours to do. And I did it entirely myself. You look at the cameraman, the editor, the works. I do have students that are all excited about helping me, and that's in the very, very, very near future. But you learn a lot from watching yourself present, talk. There are things that I wish I'd done differently already, but I can't be a perfectionist and fix them. I have to head forward. So, with that, I think I will stop.
There is another secret society at UVA, a cabal, maybe a junta, in the sense of the Spanish word junta, a committee or meeting, a cabal, but not an ouster. A group of faculty from arts and sciences and the professional schools has been meeting, convened by Jude Reagan, who is here tonight, Senior Associate Director of the Teaching Resource Center. Borrowing the title of Jude's excellent website, which catalogs the limited oral communication resources on grounds, we call ourselves Speak Your Mind. And we are committed to increasing oral communication resources here. Thomas Jefferson's vision for the university included rhetoric. The report of the commissioners for UVA begins. The commissioners for the University of Virginia, having met as by law required at the tavern in Rockfish Gap on the Blue Ridge on the first day of August of this present year, 1818. The Rockfish Gap report was encoded into state law by the General Assembly's 1819 Act for establishing a university. The current Virginia Code maintains much of the original language of the Rockfish Gap report. This is a quote. Branches of learning to be taught. A list of several disciplines, I'm picking it up here, with history, ideology, general grammar, ethics, rhetoric, and belles lettres. Now I'm going to quote Gideon Burton at Brigham Young University. In its long and vigorous history, rhetoric has enjoyed many definitions and varied widely in what it included. And yet it has mostly maintained its fundamental character as a discipline for training students, one, to perceive how language is at work, orally and in writing, and two, to become proficient in applying the resources of language in their own speaking and writing. Rhetoric has sometimes been discounted as something only concerned with style or appearances, and not with the quality or content of communication. Rhetoric was certainly discounted when the UVA Department of Rhetoric was eliminated in the mid-90s. Plato discounted rhetoric. However, Burton adds, rhetoric as set forth from antiquity was a comprehensive art, just as much concerned with what one could say as how one might say it. A basic premise for rhetoric is the indivisibility of means from meaning. How one says something conveys meaning as much as what one says. The Speak Your Mind Consortium is committed to communication across disciplines, as embodied by the University of Pittsburgh Speaking in the Disciplines Initiative. I wonder if they call themselves UP. The University of Pittsburgh is committed to the centrality of oral expression in the educational process and the opportunities for active learning it provides students to synthesize and use their knowledge, to be effective communicators in personal, workplace, and public settings. Each fall and spring term at UP, the Department of Communication offers the Speaking in the Disciplines Faculty Seminar, and this is a great idea. In collaboration with the School of Arts and Sciences and the Center for Instructional Development and Distance Learning, over the course of the seminar, faculty members working in an interdisciplinary setting redesign current courses or develop new courses around significant oral communication experiences for students. In the book, Communication Across the Curriculum and in the Disciplines, Speaking in Engineering, Deanna Dannels, or Dannels, I honestly don't know the pronunciation, explores meaning associated with speaking competently as an engineer. She indicates 5 important features of speaking in engineering: simplicity, persuasiveness, result-oriented, numerically rich, and visually sophisticated. Sounds like a good day. All of which invoke the skill of translation. She suggests orality as a site for disciplinary knowledge construction, disciplinary socialization, and negotiation of disciplinary tension. I'm sure we don't have any of that here. UVA's results in a 2005 through 6 oral communication competency assessment in arts and sciences particularly were not good. The assessing committee reported the grim statistics, concluding with 3 recommendations. If UVA seeks to produce highly competent communicators, then action must be taken. I won't say what they suggested yet. 2, if UVA seeks to coordinate knowledge and ability in public speaking with greater understanding of the intellectual contexts in which such matters exist, then action must be taken. 3, if UVA not only seeks excellence in oral communication and its intellectual contexts, but wishes to lead the way among top-tier universities, then action must be taken. At a recent meeting with arts faculty, Milton Adams, Senior Vice Provost in charge of strategic planning, suggested that chairs and faculty think big about the future. Less whining, more dreaming. Dream big and plan futures that catch donors' fancies. Enter Isocrates and back to the cabal. Speak Your Mind member Rob Patterson of the McIntyre School of Commerce introduced the group to Isocrates, a contemporary of Plato. I had heard of I, Claudius, not I, Socrates, and that's all one name, all one word, who, according to Thomas Martin, exemplified the dedication to rhetoric as a practical skill that Plato rejected as utterly wrong. Isocrates was the father of liberal education as we know it. For him, effective speech-making was taken as a sign of good training, not as the goal itself. Isocrates educated the practical man toward graceful style, influential leadership, issue-oriented analysis, preparation of the citizen, not Socratic, Platonic idealism. I, Socrates, held that speech separates man from animals. More cabal. School of Law faculty member Bob Saylor recently spent a month teaching in Stanford University's Public Communications program. 10 years ago, Stanford's Faculty Senate voted to institute a mandatory second-year oral communications course, an expansion of the first-year writing course. Speeches are videotaped and critiqued by the best students from the previous class for free. The course is wildly popular with students, many of whom go on to take advanced courses in communications, drama, and debate. Included in the Stanford program is the oral presentation of a research proposal. Speak Your Mind faculty want that experience for our UVA students. Bob Saylor approached Stanford's development force to test out the notion of UVA raising funds to create a similar program here. They said they only wished they had such a compelling reason to offer to donors who say, "Where could my money go?" Final cabal. Colleague Lily Powell of the Darden Business School has written a first draft of a letter to President Sullivan, provosts, the Strategic Planning Steering Committee, the Student Life Working Group, the Faculty Senate, the Academic Affairs Committee, and several of the working groups created to kick off the strategic planning process, among others. In this letter, which reflects the views of the Speak Your Mind collective, Lily writes, "We believe that without a greater and more meaningful commitment to public speaking, oral expression, and communication in our curricula, the university cannot adequately fulfill its mission. If an important branch of the university's mission is to prepare students for public life, every element of that life will require the knowledge, skills, and character developed through instruction in oral communication, including the ability to debate, negotiate, persuade, tell stories about the past, and articulate dreams about the future. Speak your mind as a dream. What if UVA housed a Center for Excellence in Communication? What if the center were broadly embraced and publicly announced as a central component of education at the University of Virginia? What if UVA graduates were known worldwide for their superb communication skills?
Thank you, Kate. Professor Kinney?
A few years ago, I recorded some lectures on CD, DVD formats on Shakespearean tragedy. And the last of those lectures actually moved beyond tragedy to think about those plays by Shakespeare that themselves moved beyond tragedy, the late plays. I was talking towards the end of this last lecture about The Winter's Tale, about the moment when a woman comes back to life, when a king extends a hand when he thinks it's the statue of his dead wife and says, "Oh, she's warm." I was talking about the way in these plays we have a kind of cosmic grace that offers restoration that goes beyond any simple poetic justice and is heartbreaking in quite a different way than, for example, the end of King Lear. And as usual, or almost usual, when I talk about The Winter's Tale, I realised I was choking up and that my voice was wavering and that I wasn't even sure that what I was saying was coming out clearly. So at the end of the official recording process, we sat down, me and the very nice lady who was my producer, and replayed that bit and had a serious conversation about whether the wobbles should stay in or not. And she decided that the wobbles should in fact stay on. And in the end, in fact, I got some rather nice fan mail about the wobbles, or at least about the fact that that the audience could feel my feeling. That is, I wasn't just passing on data as in a transcript of my lecture, but emotion, investment in material, passion as well. Which is an important weapon in the armory of somebody who teaches a required course to majors on medieval and Renaissance literature and has about 40% of her students enter the classroom on the first day perfectly persuaded they don't like the old stuff. If I was going to have to provoke, seduce, cajole, inveigle, and persuade people to a response they thought they couldn't possibly have. This is, of course, somewhat discipline specific. I teach literature, I teach a lot of poetry, I teach a lot of texts that aren't in modern English. I need to be able to use my own voice, to use inflection to bring out the significant syntax of a poem, or simply to bring from the page and to make people laugh at some Shakespearean one-liner, which I didn't see that funny at the time of reading. But going back to those recorded lectures, if I look at them, I do seem flatter than when I'm in the lecture hall at UVA. I'm not speaking to an audience, I'm only speaking to a camera. Interestingly, one of the big Coursera people, Al Fulries, who teaches a famous modern and contemporary American poetry course at the University of Pennsylvania, does not actually record lectures. He records discussions about poems between himself and his graduate students, which become the lectures, which is an interesting angle on this particular problem. What do I feel I would lose if I only had the canned version, the particular feel, for good or ill, of that audience at that moment, on that day, in that semester, the possibility of ad hoc tweaks and responses, and ways of reminding them there that I'm not just YouTube. The feedback loop, because of course is unfolding in real time, because I get feedback from my TAs of what might have worked, what might not have worked so well in a lecture, the space to reprise, re-emphasize, re-explain. The unscripted discovery on the spot. Sometimes my lecture notes say, do close reading of lines 9 to 13 or something, and one finds out something in the process that wasn't quite there in the head walking into the room. You lose the risk, the very exciting time. I was lecturing 10 minutes away from my office and discovered my lecture was still back in my office, and discovered I could actually say things about the middle of Antony and Cleopatra without the text. And the ability to converse, even in a lecture hall. Once I exploited mercilessly a very gifted undergraduate drama major and had him do two completely different interpretations, deliveries of Edmund's first big soliloquy in King Lear, which actually provoked a really interesting conversation, despite the fact there were 200 odd people in the room. So I guess that brings me to the point that teaching itself isn't just about lecturing, it's about conversation. And of course, conversation can take place on discussions boards as well. But, and now quoted from the August entry in the Telos blog by Robert Wiley and Stephen Nepper, and they write, online education seems to involve a sort of Cartesian exchange It splits body and mind, assuming that it is enough to relay data mind to mind across the internet. But all of our learning is embodied, even if we are sitting in front of a computer screen. There may be something very important then about actual bodies being together in a classroom. The exact advantage seems vague, or at least extremely difficult to articulate. At this point they invoke Husserl, I won't. But I would like to say, sort of slightly shift my emphasis to talk a little bit about, you may have heard that phrase when people talk about teaching without tech, teaching naked, learning naked, being naked in real time. It's not that I'm anti-tech. I use pre-plus email postings. I use them a lot. It allows people to think about material and begin to articulate responses to it before we get in the classroom. And students who are shy in the room can speak there with more confidence. But writing isn't quite the same as speaking. We all know from our own experiences there's weird things that happen to tone over email, for example. Wiley and Nepper mentioned the fact that, yes, the big online course offers a very special kind of democratization. People who can't afford to go to a big fancy university can get a taste of what it has to offer. But they also suggest there's another kind of democratization, citizenship in a seminar, or what I prefer to call the pressure of real-time presence. Sometimes it's good not to be invisible. From the instructor's perspective, to have to respond to the facial and body language in a room, the sense of comprehension or mystification, the clues that one needs to expound, explain, revise an utterance. From the student's perspective, the need to keep listening, to deal on the spot with thoughts and ideas in fast circulation, to take immediate and personal responsibility in the nicest possible way for one's own work. And it's like this kind of pressure cooker situation that can actually make everybody in the room smarter. And again, from the instructor's perspective, the question out of left field that obliges me to think fast and hard, to pull things together in a new pattern, maybe takes me in my response into discoveries that are nowhere in my class notes for the day, that weren't even in my head before that moment. The real-time dynamic in which an instructor can seize upon an exciting nugget in a remark from the floor, polish it a bit, and throw it out again for more discussion. It's not the same as posting a remark on a discussion board and then walking away from it. Where a tentative idea can get kicked around and developed by the small community as a whole. And where the community that's re-embodied twice a week for 13 weeks can develop its own agendas, where particular preoccupations are revisited. I'm teaching a course at the moment, an undergraduate course called Reinventing Hamlet. We play in depth, we look at its reception history, its adaptations, its reinventions. We've currently got a running joke about Amanda's preoccupation with why Fortinbras keeps disappearing in adaptations of the play, which at the same time has precipitated out a whole conversation about closure in the play, about the politics of the play. I think that real-timeness keeps us honest, keeps us creative, and keeps us spontaneous. And even if you're a controlling type of instructor, and I am a controlling type of instructor, yeah, 500 students are going to just laugh. It's not pre-digested. And of course, ideally, it means that over the course of a semester, one is shaping, or rather the class is shaping, a very complicated composition of many voices that goes well beyond the dreaded metrics of learning outcomes. I'll finish with an example of what teaching naked and learning naked can produce. It is deeply unscientific. I'll admit it arose out of a particularly strong self-selecting undergraduate seminar, and we would totally disapprove of the fact of a data set of one. Not coincidentally, perhaps, it was a course about strongly performative voices. We were looking at the kinds of masks and disguises adopted by characters in and speakers of lyric and dramatic and narrative texts in the 16th and early 17th century. We were particularly looking at the voicing all kinds of desire at a historical moment that was fascinated by the theatricalized self, the performing self. Think Book of the Courtier, Machiavelli, sonnet sequences, As You Like It, Sidney's Arcadia. And the students were so strong, our conversations had been so dynamic, that the week before the end of the class, I looked at the end of my syllabus where it just says concluding remarks. And I said, our last class would do something different. It would be retitled One Last Intervention, and it was their intervention, their last word on the topic. They could have 4 minutes each, and they could be creative if they liked. They were wonderfully creative. Everybody got to speak their one last intervention, with the exception of the double major in studio art, who brought an allegorical painting of the course. And I particularly liked, we did a bit of pastoral literature, the bit in the bottom corner with sheep eating sonnets. And it was wonderfully elusive in the way it replayed our texts in their voices. We read As You Like It, which finishes with Rosalind giving the last remarks and starting by saying, it is not the fashion to see the lady, the epilogue. Well, we had, it is not the fashion to see the student, the epilogue, as the student then gave her own epilogue to the course. We also had the 7 ages of man, except it covered the 8 works in the course. It was pointed out that we were like the Book of the Courtier, and I was the Duchess of Urbino, presiding over the conversations. We had allusion at all levels to the running jokes from the semester. We had miniature sonnet sequences. Did you know you can fit 3 sonnets into 4 minutes if you read quickly? We had commentary on our works, on each other, on our discoveries, and of course on centuries-old performing selves turned its students into performance artists, actors and audiences at once in those 75 minutes, when each one spoke to what he or she had found significant or memorable in our conversations through their own makings, through their own revoicings. And I, for once, was silent, although emotionally labile as I was of course, breaking up more or less, because they were so wonderful. I suppose this could have happened sort of kind of on a discussion board. But it was very much about real-time presence, about the fact that it was, say, Jenny, whose voice and personal style and sense of humour and intellectual preoccupations we got acquainted with over 30 weeks, who was saying this now to all of us, and that we were all there to listen to her. And I have just offered you a mere fumbling mediation or recreation of what was emphatically not a virtual experience. You had, in every possible sense, to have been there.
Andrew Wade. Voice work, keeping it practical. I feel very much like I'm treading a kind of unfamiliar path with you here. I'm relying on the written word, on this abstract representation of my feelings and thoughts, while most of my time is spent, as the very title of the paper tries to imply, working practically with actors and wrestling likewise with issues. What indeed is the function of a voice person, or of voice work in theatre? I have no doubt that there are a certain number of words that spring to your mind almost instinctively when voice is mentioned. If I may venture a series of guesses, they could be verse speaking, audibility, diction, projection, received pronunciation, standard American speech, and indeed standards of speaking. So many issues seem to be tied up to voice at the moment. Issues of cultural, social, intellectual, artistic, and indeed political importance. As a voice coach on a production, I'm always trying to find ways to open up the actors' voices and addressing audibility in the given theatre space, but also trying to find ways with the director for actors to connect with words. For example, my first boss at the Royal Shakespeare Company, Terry Hands, tended to demand more pace and want his actors to speak to the end of each verse line, dominantly. So often, then the voice work consisted in trying to help the actor discover the energy of word to word that would in the end release the speed whilst maintaining the specific thinking. Trevor Nunn wanted to devote more attention to the specific relation between words, parts of speeches. He also wanted more naturalism. So to work on the structure of a speech could be helpful for the actors in that it allowed them to find a relationship through form also. Directors like John Barton, who have a more intellectual approach to meaning, trying to find the physical ways to free the actors so as to enable them to reach their own personal connection with the text, taking the sole concentration off the conscious mind, as it were, but always trying to help an actor find their confidence with the words by encouraging them to create their own imaginative response to language. I believe that as a voice coach, in building up trust and respect for practical voice work, one is empowering the individual. Each person should not only be capable, but should also have the right to express themselves with words. In the end, voice work has a social and political importance. Perhaps none more so than the thorny issue of Shakespeare. Should it be taught? How? Is it relevant anymore to all of us in our society? We often say that a speech, an entire production, sometimes is not well spoken, is not up to standards. What do we mean by that? Evidently, there are a certain number of basic rules which an actor has to know when working on a classical text. These, in most cases, are known. But there is then the question of the choice which the actor makes when speaking. And I'm certainly not denying that some of these choices can be more relevant than others. However, a sound is not a sound without somebody to lend an ear to it. Rhetoric is nothing without an audience. There are a certain number of factors which affect the receiver's ear. These can be cultural factors, such as the transition between different acting styles, or the level of training which our contemporary ear has had. There are also personal, emotional factors. Perhaps often we feel the performance was not well spoken because somehow it did not live up to our expectations of how we think it should be performed. Is it that many of us have a self-conscious model, perhaps our own first experience of Shakespeare, that meant something to us and becomes our reference point for the future? Some treasured performance kept under glass. Nothing from then on can quite compare with that experience. But most of the times is much more complex than nostalgia. Take, for example, the thorny area of accent. I must confess, I have over the years received many letters, a lot from this country, explaining how the incomprehensible British accents put one more layer between these people and understanding. I only mention America because from a country and culture with an even richer variety of speech tunes than my country, one might expect perhaps a greater tolerance towards accent. But surprisingly, what is expected is a type of English deprived of its natural colour and verging on what we like to call received pronunciation. I remind myself constantly that audibility is not embedded in received pronunciation. The familiarity which those in power have with speech and the articulate confidence gained from coming from the right quarters, and many other points I could bring up, can lead us all to hear these types of voices as outshining all others. But to my mind, the role of theatre is at least to question these assumptions so that we do not simply perpetuate those givens, but work towards a broader tolerance. Every speech pattern accent, rhythm is capable of audibility. Each speech pattern has its own music. Each speech pattern is not an accent until it's compared to other accents. The point that makes every speech pattern audible is the dynamic of the physical making of these sounds. The speaker must have the desire to get through to a listener and must be confident that every speech pattern has the right to be heard. So for me, when I work with the actors, it's always a question of finding the way for each person to be articulate. Not, of course, that articulation is solved for all, that if we all speak in a particular accent. In the end, surely, what we all want is good acting, not just good speaking. Good acting that convinces, persuades, and where the speaking is a part of this whole. This is where the voice coach may come in, for, as my second boss at the REC, Adrian Noble, once remarked, a good voice teacher is a good acting teacher. Good speaking also implies good listening, being actively engaged in a performance. Obviously, to hear an actor, you have to be concentrating on the actor who is speaking. Sometimes, for a multitude of different reasons, the actor's preoccupation with his way of acting, the stage picture created at that moment, a lighting effect, anything that pulls the audience away from the actor speaking, can contribute to our being unable to follow the performance text, and may therefore leave us feeling we cannot hear, that the text is not well spoken, even if that same actor was standing still with one spotlight on him or her, speaking at the same volume. Now let me enter into the core of my belief about the function of the voice coach in theatre, or at least where my preoccupations and interests are at present. Why, might you be wondering, is it so important to keep voice work practical? What do I mean by practical? Practical work, let's face it, is usually slightly looked down upon out in the outside world of theatre. Practical stands for not elevating, too experimental, not scientific, intellectually frustrating, a waste of time and energy. And yet I would argue that this type of work has many all-important functions. I would even say that everything about theatre revolves around practicality. Plays themselves are not simply literary events. They demand interpreters in the deepest sense of the word, and the language of Shakespeare requires, therefore, not a vocal demonstration of writing techniques, but an imaginative response to that writing. The key word here is imagination. The task of the voice coach being to offer relevant choices to the actor, so that this actor's imagination is titillated, excited by the language, which he or she can then share with an audience, playing on that audience's imagination. If one seeks only intellectual pleasure out of theatre, fine, I can respect that. However, I would suggest that one is at the same time choosing to discard the very experience of theatre. I believe no writer or poet would be ready to concede that their thoughts came first and short-circuited the organic process of experimenting practically with words. I was working with a company in Vancouver, and at the end of the week's rehearsals, having explored our voices and opened out different pieces of text to hear the possibilities of the rhythm, to feel how the meter affects the thinking and feeling, looked at structure and form, one of the actors said to me that as well as being an actor, he was also a writer of soap operas, and that I had completely changed his way of writing. Do you think that desperate housewives would work in rhyming couplets? Somehow this seems difficult to imagine, I don't know. But seriously, the writer's comments set me thinking at the time. I'm always trying to find ways of exploring the actor's process, of opening our actors' connection with language that isn't their own. So I started thinking it would be a good idea to involve writers and actors in some practical work on language. After talking to Cicely Berry and Colin Chambers, the then RSC literary advisor, we put together a group of writers who were interested in taking part as some actors. It was a fascinating experience all round and broke down barriers and misconceptions. The actors discovered, for instance, that the writer is not coming from a very different place to them in their creative search, that an idea, an image, may result from a struggle to define a gut feeling, and not some crafted, well-formed idea in the head. The physical connection of language to the body was reaffirmed. After working on Yeats' poem, Easter 1916, Anne Devlin changed the title of the play she was writing to After Easter. Such practical exchanges through voice and language work stimulate a theatre company and go beyond merely making sure the actors' voices are technically sound. It is of course no different when we work on a Shakespeare play. A similar physical connection with the language is crucial. Shakespeare in many ways is crafted instinct. It is thus our task to find the best way to tap into someone's imagination. The moment when actors are no longer heard is when the emotions which get their own imaginations going are stilted, rigid, and fall sadly short of the dramatist's imagination. As Peter Brook put it, people forget that a text is dumb. To make it speak, one must create a communication machine. A living network, like a nervous system, must be made. The text, which comes from far away, is to touch the sensibility of the present. This journey is never to be taken for granted. It is a process which every text must undergo every time it is staged. There is no definitive rehearsal that would solve the problems and indicate the ways of staging a given play. Again, this is perhaps where creative, practical work on voice can help forge new meaning by offering areas of exploration and challenge. I suppose implicitly, the central area behind voice work comes back to posing the question, does meaning change when I speak out aloud? It would be unwise to jump hastily to the end of this process, for again, as Brooke says, a word does not start as a word. Shakespeare's words are records of words that he wanted spoken, words issuing as sounds from people's mouths, with pitch, pause, rhythm, and gesture as part of their meaning. A word does not start as a word. It is the end product which begins as an impulse, stimulated by attitude and behavior, which dictates the need for expression. Something happens when we vocalize, when we isolate sounds, when we start to speak words aloud, and when they are put to the test of our physicality, of our anatomy. We expose ourselves in a way that makes taking that language back more difficult. Our body begins to debate with itself, becomes alive with the vibrations of sound produced in the mouth or rooted deep in the muscles which aim at defining sound. In fact, the spoken words bring into play all the senses before sense and another level of meaning are reached. How do I know what I think until I hear what I say, as Oscar Wilde once said? A concrete illustration of this phrase was reported to me when I was leading a workshop recently. A grandmother said that the work we had done that day and what I was talking about reminded her of what her 6-year-old grandson said to his mother while they were driving through Wales. "Look, Mummy, sheep, sheep, sheep." "You don't have to keep telling us," the mother replied. But the boy said, "How do I know they're there if I don't tell you?" Therefore, when we speak of ideas of sense, we slightly take for granted those physical processes which affect a word and change its meaning. We tend to separate something which is an organic whole. In doing so, we become blind to the fact that it is precisely this physical connection to the words which enables the actors to make that language theirs. The struggle for meaning is not just impressionistic theatre mystique, it is an indispensable aspect of the rehearsal process and carries on during the life of every production. In this struggle, practical work on poetry is useful, as we've heard, and may help both to spark creativity and shed some light on the way meaning is born into language. After a performance of More Words, a show that Cicely Berry and I directed, Katie Mitchell, the artistic director then of The Other Place, gave me an essay by Ted Hughes because of its echoes with the piece. In it, Ted Hughes compares the writing of a poem, the coming into existence of words, to the capture of a wild animal. You will notice that in the following passage, Hugh talks of spirit, living parts, but never of thought or sense. With great care and precaution, he advises, it is better to call the poem an assembly of living parts, moved by a single spirit. The living parts are the words, the images, the rhythms. The spirit is the life which inhabits them when they all work together. It is impossible to say which comes first, parts or spirit. If by way of concluding this paper, I look for a moment to the future of voice work in theatre, I think I'm able to say with some degree of certainty that the demand for this type of work will in fact be greater in years to come because of the way we live today, because of the way we are trained, because of the current climate in the world of theatre. Increasingly, directors want to incorporate voice work as they are often curious to learn more about a perspective which for them has ceased to be common knowledge. This climate has created a situation in which a voice coach has a greater sense of being included, of being part of a team. I believe this is something positive for theatre. What theatre seems to be lacking at the moment, however, is the philosophical attitude of finding the way forward for actors today. In an artistic world where expectations have become vastly different, and where the new value system somewhat discourages practice and exploration. I try to find ways to excite actors with Shakespeare, to demystify approaches to classical text, and to help those actors experience the value of regular work. But above all, it has to be by working with directors who are passionate about Shakespeare and with a vision of language work, because in the end, it is they who set the agenda for what voice work can be in theatre. On a more personal note, I'm often reminded of how much, as an individual, I owe to Shakespeare's spoken word. The rather quiet and inarticulate schoolboy I once was found in the speaking, the acting of those words, a means to quench his thirst for expression. I would like to close with a few lines which I cannot help but make my own whenever I speak them. These are taken from a poem by the Welsh poet Gillian Clark. My head is full of sound, remembered speech, syllables, ideas just out of reach. The close loop sound of curlew and the far subsidiary roar, cadences shaped by the long coast of the peninsula, the continuous pentameter of the sea. When I was 10, a fool and a king sang rhymes about sorrow, and there I heard that nothing is until it has a word. Thank you.
So now it's to you and to our panelists. It's an open conversation, but because I'm here, I'm going to seize the first opportunity by turning back to you, Lou, and to ask you, what persuaded you to take on the online initiative? You suggested some, but did you have misgivings? Did you immediately leap to the idea of a much larger audience? In light of what we've been thinking about since you spoke?
Yeah, I think it's for the same reason that people climb mountains, because it's there. It's an adventure. I'm always eager to, I seek out adventures, some of them foolhardy, but I do them anyway. And I like conveying an understanding of science to ordinary people. It's really my mission in life. So this is an opportunity to try it out on a larger, well, possibly larger scale. But I never sense the audience in the camera. I'm always doing it for myself, so or for the people in the room. So the idea that actually someone will watch this still doesn't enter my mind.
Do you tell jokes?
Sure.
You do.
Yeah, but I guess I do it to please people, but they're very abstract.
So let me turn to any of you. Yes, please, Alison.
Yes, I have a colleague, now retired, who used to say at every faculty meeting, teaching is a branch of the performing arts. And this comment always annoyed me, because I would say to myself, I am not in the entertainment business, I am in the education business. But you've pretty much won me over. But I'd like to introduce a concept. We have heard a lot about voice work. Is there something called silence work? Claire mentioned the value of teaching. I teach in a department of Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. Many of my colleagues are hyphenated Americans. They are Cuban Americans, Mexican Americans, Spanish Americans. They are wonderful actors. I love to watch them teach. Not only listening to the way they use their voice and their body, but their faces. They seem to have many more muscles in their face than I have. And I especially like to watch them listen to students. When the student asks a question or makes a comment, you can see this panoply of expressions move across their face. Amazement, curiosity, perplexity. Can this kind of facial attentiveness, facial expressiveness be taught, be improved? Can it be communicated in a virtual environment?
Anyone on the panel to engage? I'm afraid it's to you, though, if no one else steps forward.
Well, in the virtual classroom, the camera is closed. I'm there talking. I guess I would say that's one-on-one. So I do have a sense of audience, but it's a single person of we don't know who they are exactly. And so my facial expression does matter. And it's like telling jokes. Sure, I tell jokes. I have a fun time doing it. Just like wait, I guess as an introvert, I'm best in a one-on-one conversation. And so I think that's what I'm feeling as I'm doing it. And so I'm there having, what I'm doing in a conversation, I'll roll my eyes or I'll do whatever's appropriate. The people, what you described, seeing on the faces of some people, it's clearly taught, but not intentionally. It's we make it cultural. The different cultures have different ways of expressing themselves. Hardly the right field to know much beyond that observation, but they learn how to do this, and there are also some cultures in which there's no facial expression, there's no engagement. Actually, you're talking about, I'll go back to your quote of teaching the entertainment business. No, it's not entertainment business, it's the engagement business. So that a good teacher is not entertaining, a good teacher is engaging, and it's a performance. I certainly do feel like I'm performing when I teach. And putting a camera there sort of makes it official. But but it's trying to be as engaging as possible. And that involves, the jokes and the facial expression. Just like be involved in a conversation with one person.
I just think therein lies the rub, is that it's not one-on-one, because the camera doesn't react to your joke. You may react to the producer laughing and not laughing, and the cameraman laughing and not laughing, but that's where it's harder to achieve that, because any good actor, any good teacher is listening to how their students, their audience, is reacting to what they're putting out there. And I think that's the challenge. Your definite challenge is, if the joke doesn't land, your lecture goes on. they don't push pause and do the choose your own adventure version where they didn't like the joke, you know. So that's what's challenging, is it's not one. It's one, and that's it. You know, like you put it out there. And I think any good teacher has to listen and troubleshoot based on what they feel their students are taking in, or if their students give them a response that lets them know, I'm with you or I'm not with you. So, I mean, you talk about those challenges, but that's it. It's putting something out there and not adapting, not having a choice to adapt based on what the students throw back. And that's the challenge.
It is a challenge because I have to be the audience as well. In fact, and I have to.
Right, and you can't, and that's the whole, we all know, like everybody learns. So that, I think that's why this whole virtual idea of teaching, they may learn something, but certainly not in the same way that they would learn something if their teacher was able to jump out of the screen and troubleshoot based on what they're hearing, what they're.
I'm wondering if there's been any thought given to the idea of creating these courses while the teacher, professor, is lecturing or in conversation with a classroom full of students. Because that, to me, seems like at least a partial solution to this loss of interaction. That even though the virtual students, the distance learning students, cannot be an instant part of the conversation, they can be aware of the interaction between the professor and the students in the room. And it doesn't seem to me that that would be so technically difficult given the miniaturization of cameras and sound equipment that we have today. Is that part of the planning?
It's already happening, I mentioned. I think the way that this professor
But you mentioned it as an anomaly. It seems to me as though
I'm not well enough in the variations in what's basically the exploding beginning field to know whether other people did it. It seemed to me interesting that he wanted conversations out of that and not lectures.
Maybe we could follow that exchange, thinking back to your eloquent defense, Andrew, of what can happen in the act of speech, and then to think about your own work in film and I suppose television. What have you seen? Loss or new gain when you change medium?
Well, I was sort of thinking as I came over on the plane, if we were starting education today with all the media at its disposal, is this how we would do it, by filming? I don't think we would. But I think as a complement or as a support system in another way, then I can see huge advantages there. But as the panel's been saying all evening, there's something very removed and very, very distant from having something between you and who you're speaking to. You're not engaging in vibrations in the same way, which has huge impacts. But also, as we've said, it's very hard to quantify that scientifically to prove a point. But most of us enjoy interaction together. We all know that a family should eat together around a table as opposed to eat separately. I mean, all these things are pulling us apart, aren't they? But what is community? It seems to me that for me, education is about community. So it's how we keep that alive, really.
I keep noticing just the consternation, bewilderment, the eagerness to talk about it, the rapidity with which people come to judgment and then change their judgment, because we know we're living through a transition that we don't understand. All the more reason, I think, to keep exchanging. We know some of this is going to happen, and who can resist the thought, after all, of someone on the other end of the globe who's never had a chance to hear a coherent presentation from anyone on this panel? To offer that has to be some kind of good.
It's tricky, isn't it? Yeah, because for example, in theatre now, you can see filmed versions of theatre performances, and I was very snobbish when that started to be done. But I can understand intellectually that reaches many more people. But I'm concerned for my profession because what it means is theatre companies and sponsors are no longer going to give money for touring companies because now touring in the future will be watch it on a cinema screen. As has been touched on, the difference between film and live theatre is vast. So it's a tricky one, yeah.
Well, your observation about just filming lectures, just filming, that has been tried effectively, but that turns out to be, it fails. In general, it fails just to film a lecture, because it's as though a camera sat where one of the students was and films it. Somehow it loses the presence, and there's nothing to make up for it. The result is it's rather tedious to watch lectures like that. They have terrible attrition rates. The same thing happens with, I think, with filmed theater. Somehow replacing one of the people in the audience with a camera, filming it. It's like it goes from 3 dimensions to 2. Something deadens it. It becomes much less enjoyable to watch. You have to do something spectacular to turn it into a medium.
That's right. And certain films, productions work better than others, so it becomes about what actually will feel better. But also the whole thing of, we all know, don't we, that if we're having a long-distance relationship, we do not talk about personal things over the telephone, because there's something lost, but both in the way the voice is reflected over the telephone, and also the lack of having eye contact in another way. So all these things are very tricky to start translating them.
Go ahead.
I'm, in most cases, sort of as skeptical as the next person about sort of putting things online, but I've actually taken loosely an online course that actually combined film lectures and sort of breakout sessions where the professor, was in a closed room speaking directly to the camera and sort of bridging or filling in or cutting out some of the messier parts of when I was in class discussion or something like that. And I thought the combination actually worked really well. There were times in which I thought the lecture was much more interesting than the, sort of one on-camera sessions. And then there were times when I thought the on-camera sessions were very helpful. I quite enjoy seeing film performances on stage on screen. I would never ever replace a live performance for me. I don't think. And a concert, so I don't know if this goes very well, but to me it's a great option for outreach. If you see a film, a filmed theatrical production, then you get hungry for the live version and you want to accompany them because you know that you saw it, it was great. I sometimes forget and almost start clapping when I'm in the stage performance, but it's never as good as the real thing. But I don't think they have to be.
But you know that because you've experienced the other. There's going to be a whole generation that's only going to experience the film version. That's my worry.
I wonder if this is drastically different in the sciences versus the humanities, because especially here what you're talking about with the real-time engagement, I was imagining this major as an undergrad, so I see you both work both. But I couldn't imagine someone lecturing to me about film and not be able to say back something and help something that's jumping out, or even how the class does develop their own certain preoccupations as the semester goes on. But it seems like maybe this would work better with some of the sciences. I actually, as an undergrad, on my own went to an MIT linear algebra course, where it was the camera was just there in the lecture, and in front they would kind of turn the camera around again, you'd see all the students there, and then just turn it back around, and I don't know, it was really successful. I went to my individual class, but then also did it online on my own. And there were times when I really felt like I was getting more out of the online MIT one than actually going to that linear algebra class in person. So I don't know, is this different for sciences versus humanities, or just have a different sort of applicability? I'm not sure.
Anyone want to speak to that question?
I think you're right. It does have, it is discipline dependent. The difference that I experience in teaching physics, my class is a little different than the typical, is I actually know pretty much the whole thing, the whole story. The students by and large don't. And the discussion is asymmetric in a way that's pretty extreme, so that they're unlikely to find something that I misunderstand. In my class, what they can do, these days too. But what they can do is they can bring in insights. Say we talk about how a bicycle works, and they'll bring in insights about a motorcycle and I've never ridden one in there. So they can bring. But it is really me dumping information to them or than the reverse. And in these other classes, talking about Shakespeare, it's the students really, I would presumably, they have real insights. The material is accessible enough, and they're certainly not going to be as sophisticated as someone who's immersed themselves in it for 30 years, but they can bring in real value in a way that they won't in a science.
There's no calculus prerequisite. But also, I think your point is really good, because I think sometimes the danger in this conversation is to imagine a situation where there is the perfect platonic classroom full of people contributing wonderfully in real time. I admitted in my presentation there's other seminars where there's no chemistry in the room and 10 people all be silent for no reason one could ever possibly understand, even if they're very, very smart, for example. As I said, the false dichotomy of the perfect in-person class on the one hand and the merely virtual course on the other, whereas what we're seeing is all kinds of hybridizations and intermediary states, combining things. And we didn't, of course, even touch on the exciting topic of the flipped lecture course. Richard?
I have an observation and a question. The observation is simply about the different media forms that this could eventually take. I mean, I think we're still in the late stages. We're talking about the relative impact of live lectures versus tape versus the kind of edited shows you're doing. I mean, when you think about the production values involved in something like a pro football broadcast or a Net HD broadcast where people are sitting essentially at, well, the first broadcast at the same time that it's actually taking place live someplace else, and there's this kind of aura of liveness, even though it's obviously not live. And it seems to me that, 10, 15 years down the road, it's impossible to know which of these formats might be sort of used and found to be most effective in different systems. So that was just an observation. We have to remember there's a big world of media out there that at the moment we don't have the money to access. The question was either for Kate or for Mr. Wade. It has to do with, particularly for you, since you were talking so much about the practical elements and how words become spoken. So, does that change, or does your work with actors change when there's media? When there's media involved, when either you know that the production is going to be taped, or you're doing a film, or even there's some kind of media on stage, if it's a modern production with video screens and microphones and so on. I'm just curious how that sort of changes your sense of what has to be done with the voice.
I mean, obviously, if you're being filmed and recorded, then there isn't the issue of whether you can reach a large audience. So the idea of audibility isn't quite the same issue. So your connection to the text is important, but whether you can share that to 1,000 people is not going to be the same issue. So that's going to be different, certainly. And then within that then becomes the whole idea of taste and acting style, which may well be different when you're being filmed close up. We all know that from politicians, don't we? Those that actually film better and those that actually are better when they're speaking over distance. So size is going to be an important aspect. I suppose they're the two ones that come to mind. Okay.
Well, I would say that mic'd voices are really an unfortunate phenomenon, and they make such a tinny sort of veil between the speaker and the listeners. I don't like the mic, and Andrew doesn't like the mic, but I guess they're an unfortunate necessity. I get very alarmed when I'm coaching productions and directors want to underscore speeches with music. Okay, well, we'll see how it goes. But can mostly not hear or understand the speech, and then like, can you just take that down? Just take that music Now, if the voice person has the power to make that suggestion, and then sometimes the music disappears, so it's just, can the actor speak louder? You know, there's enough good tension there.
There's another implication, I think, in the question, Richard, about production values that might come our way. A lot of money is spent producing the production values, and I was so struck when you were talking about how you were making it yourself, that it's a homemade course that they throw at you. In a way, it's a surprise. We know that everywhere in the press, people are talking about the online educational revolution. And here, our distinguished colleague has to spend 50 hours to produce 1 hour on his own. It's not so easy to see how we can invest in the transformation of all of our teaching practices. One question? No.
I love acting, and I feel very comfortable public speaking, but I know that in certain classes, specifically classes that deal with language, that there's several students who don't feel comfortable. And I know that you're saying you feel that the students are changing in their interactions with them, that they feel more dependent on technology, less comfortable engaging in face-to-face communication. Do you feel that it really has gotten worse? And have you, specifically with language teachers, because I know I have friends who have had to learn the Old English passages to recite in class, and have come to me asking about memorization tips and things. Have you had to change your course structure at all because of this? Yeah, you or anyone, because of how the student interactions have changed.
By Old English, do you mean Shakespeare?
I think they were
Because I have visions of them reciting Beowulf in the original Anglo-Saxon when you say Old English.
well, I think it was something that was like a Renaissance or pre-Renaissance.
That's early modern English. So it's not really very old.
Sorry.
I am not sure that if I'm offering extra credit for recitation, there seems to be no problem whatsoever. I guess I would be more like to kidnap your question and think about. I'm interested in the fact that it is so much more easy these days to, as it were, communicate with the master, to have it mediated, to be safely there. I was fascinated by what Banjo was saying about just almost like the semantics of speaking, about a word comes out, you have to own it, you have a different relationship with it. I spend a lot of time thinking about silence, and it's usually thinking about those three people who are not speaking in my seminar, and trying to work out the semantics of their silence, to read their silence. But flipping this and thinking of what it means to have a certain kind of investment in risk, in the risk of speaking, whether somebody is more risky to speak in a high-tech age. These are all fascinating questions, all of which I can answer. But it does seem to, as if the scene has shifted. We're certainly a long way from an education system, say, in this country, where people were expected to do recitations, 100 years ago, that, in class, you would have little books of poetry that was, especially designed and felt it good to be recited. People have a different relationship with their voices, certainly, except perhaps when they're recording them and putting them on YouTube.
I teach some computer science, and one of the things that we found is that the students who get it, we can just teach. But students who don't get it, we need to engage in and speaking with each other in small groups. We've spoken a lot about power of voice. I'm interested in your thoughts on the power of voice from the student's perspective, the student's voice. Is this something that can be carried into the online world as part of what we're talking about? But just in general, how do you facilitate this? How important is this in other fields as well?
Oh, well, it's crucial. In my class, until speaking happens, nothing happens. But it makes the silence very important too. Breaking silence is a very political act. And I think at UVA it's very hard. I've had students say there's such a consciousness of image here, and there's fear of brown-nosing or trying to impress. So to break silence and to speak out and to offer what might be construed as an intellectual thought makes the rest of the class go, wow. You know, and that's a terrible pressure.
Well, related to what you were asking about, the change in times, I think all of us get more emails than we did 20 years ago. I forget what you know. But more and more, the students seem to step back and try to put us at some distance by way of, for example, electronic media of various sorts, but they're not spoken word. And I never thought of such as a spoken word, but I always tell students, don't ask me physics questions on email because I can't have a conversation. Email is a conversation. It's a series of one-way communications. And so come see me face to face. But I hadn't thought that it's not just about the lack of the media back and forth. It's also I can't hear their voice, simply I can't see their face. And what they write is so flat. It's lost so much content that it's uninterpretable. Or it's
Speaking is actually more efficient in those terms. The non-high-tech, you can get so much more done so much more quickly.
This seems actually just the right moment to receive the gift that Andrew Wade has conceived for us. So if you hold your seats and you leave Andrew.
We'd like to clear the first few rows of seats, and then Andrew will lead the text work right in front. So maybe some of you would want to stand, or you can come gather around.